Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. It's been just weeks since Election Day 2024, and the world is already shifting dramatically. Let's start first with the Ukraine war, Eric, and what's been taking place there. And obviously the emergence of the 47th president in advance of his swearing in has already sort of shifted a lot of dynamics across the world. Perhaps the most intense is with the Ukraine war and attacks from Russia into Ukraine, from Ukraine into Russia. Let me start here, Eric. I really think we need a primer, a basic understanding from you about long-range missiles and how they're being leveraged in this conflict. We started, of course, literally days after the election of Donald Trump, with Joe Biden signaling the approval for Zelensky to use U.S.-made long-range missiles into Russia. And then, of course, Russia has responded. Can you give us the real basics so we understand what this actually means for the conflict, how it's escalating because of the use of long-range missiles, and what it means also for nuclear conflict?
What Biden approved after Kamala Harris lost the election was the Lockheed Martin ATACMS missile. It's a 190-mile maximum precision missile, ballistic missile, that was used for the first time to strike targets inside of Russia. And the Russians had given all kinds of red lines about that, but now we've crossed the line because they're using U.S.-made weapons to attack Russian targets. And the Russians responded by firing an actual nuclear-capable ballistic missile that is capable of much farther than 190 miles, and it has multiple warheads. I think the video showed it had 6 or 8 warheads, and they obviously were carrying conventional explosive payloads, not nuclear payloads. But you can see some amazing video attached that shows the Mach 9 impact speed. So even if you're firing rocks at Mach 9, it's going to hit with enormous kinetic energy. They used conventional explosives, and they attacked some industrial facilities and hit them. But this missile, if it had been carrying nuclear weapons, you would not have been able to stop it, wouldn't have been able to shoot it down. B, it could have struck between 6 and 8 individual targets inside of Ukraine. And for that matter, it could also strike targets well inside of Europe. So it was very much an escalation of capability of weapons that were fired. In fact, the Russians actually called the United States first to let them know they were firing this, so they didn't have a wrong idea about an actual nuclear missile coming at Europe. So it's a unnecessary escalation by the United States. It's the Ukrainians shooting ATACMS missiles at Russian targets is not going to affect the outcome of the war. It did affect significantly an escalation, and this whole thing needs to be brought to a close quickly.
So this is the Biden administration's way of getting the United States more entrenched in this conflict by signaling his approval to use our long-range missiles by Ukraine?
I think it's more like a drowning man grabbing for any rope in the water, thinking it might save them or might save a failing effort. And it's just, there's not a good win. All this war is doing is grinding up more Ukrainian men and more Russian men demographically for the next generations. It's the front lines are not going to shift significantly. Both sides are losing calamitous numbers of people. And at this matter, it's really like the trench warfare of World War I, just sitting and trading artillery shells and stacking bodies. And it's unnecessary, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, this is atrocious. The people spoke on Election Day. Donald Trump is very, very clear that he wants the killing to end. He has promised he's going to resolve this conflict very quickly. In fact, I think, Eric, looking ahead to January, I think it'll be his first big win when he brings this to a close, and I'm confident that he'll do so. But so for Antony Blinken, Joe Biden, Jake Sullivan, the defense secretary, Austin. For these guys, I mean, you're right. This is clinging on to hope that they can keep this conflict alive, that they can keep this narrative about Russian aggression alive and NATO's expansion. This is just mind blowing to me that they would actually take it this step further after Election Day.
It's about the last card they have left to play, and they need to stop playing any more provocation cards because the American people have spoken. Sure, the Ukrainians, if they want to keep fighting, we can't dictate to them what they want to do, but it doesn't mean the U.S. taxpayer has to financially contribute, and it certainly means we don't have to send any more weapons and risk exposing ourselves. You know, the other downside of firing this ATACMS weapon into Russian territory is that they have the chance to recover the pieces and the components they've shot down. And what we found with every other weapon system that they've used against the Russians is that within days or weeks, they develop some kind of electronic countermeasure for it to jam up the navigation and the command link to make it much less effective. And so now we've done that with the ATACMS as well. So you could even argue we've made ourselves weaker by doing this. So it's you know, in the idiot politicians, the Lindsey Grahams of this world that say, "Oh, we're making the Russian army weaker." No, we are not. They are getting better and smarter, and they're the iterative process of developing and accelerating drone warfare, autonomous warfare, ground robots, and the defenses against other incoming drones. They're on the bleeding edge. They're learning, and I would argue that they are vastly more capable at the end of this war than they were at the beginning.
So leading into the election, Joe Biden had sent an additional, I believe it was $40 billion to Ukraine. Clearly, the last check he was going to write before Donald Trump comes into office. Is this really the last card they can play? I mean, there's still, 2 months before Donald Trump takes office. Is there anything else you could conceivably imagine that they could do beyond this new escalation?
I think France, Britain, I believe I saw recently, were considering sending troops into Ukraine to fight there. That's just a horrifically stupid idea. It means if people are going to be stupid in Europe, it means we don't have to be part of NATO anymore. You could argue that NATO should have been dissolved in 91 when the Soviet Union collapsed because the Warsaw Pact was a coalition of Eastern European communist affiliated nations, and NATO was a counterbalance alliance for that. When the Warsaw Pact went away and when the Soviet Empire collapsed, you could argue the need for NATO went away as well. But I would say the globalist and the military-industrial complex class of people wanted to keep it going because they wanted to keep the weapon sales and a bigger military footprint. So um, Europe may finally be waking up to having to spend for their defense needs because they haven't been doing it adequately at all. When Trump took over, I think there was 5 of 28 countries spending 2%. Now there's at least 11. But the biggest economy, the third largest economy in the world, Germany, still spends 1.2%, barely, and they have very few tanks that run, very few fighter aircraft. I don't think any of their submarines are combat capable. So it's just a lack of seriousness. Germany has really gone off the rails economically, militarily, culturally. It's as if the socialist, communist rot has really overwhelmed Germany. So again, not our problem, not something we have to solve. We have to pay for, and certainly not defend. Trump is right to be strong on this to say this is what we're in for, and beyond that, you guys are on your own, and that's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, and he's sending. He's announced his appointment of Matt Whitaker, the former acting attorney general, in his first term as the U.S. ambassador to NATO. And I can just imagine Matt's marching orders is get these suckers
Oh
to
yeah,
pay up.
Matt's a big guy, and he will present a clear, verbal, physical, intellectual presence of what the U.S. position is.
Yeah, damn straight he will. Yeah, that's going to be exciting to watch him make a difference there. So let's talk for a moment, Eric, about the Russian response. Um, they obviously had to respond in kind. As you said, they sent a signal to the U.S., so their intentions were not mistaken. Um, what more do you imagine they will do? Or can you imagine that maybe Putin will bide his time, recognizing Trump's going to come in and they're going to negotiate a deal out of this?
Look, you never want to be the last soldier to die in the last battle of the last war. And I think if Putin realizes that there's a better likelihood of resolving this peacefully after January 20, I can't see them making any other massive offensive moves unless they think they're going to have some decisive breakthrough and drive all the way to Kiev. Maybe, but I just don't see that happening. So I'm hoping that you'll see a bit of a Christmas slowdown and a curtailment of the killing until some adults are in charge in Washington again, and hopefully this thing is resolved without more carnage.
Yeah, well, and it's not confirmed, of course. He's not been appointed yet, but news reports have just come out showing that Rick Grinnell, former U.S. ambassador to Germany, former director of national intelligence, is under consideration by Trump to be a U.S. envoy to address the Russian-Ukraine conflict. That to me would be tremendous news if Rick Grinnell gets that assignment. And I think, like I said, he can deliver a very early win for Donald Trump. What's your reaction to that possible appointment of Rick Grinnell?
I think that's a fantastic choice. Rick is a true professional and a diplomat, and he doesn't accept bullshit. He is well respected in Europe and well respected by the Serbs. He did a lot to help resolve differences in the Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia, ongoing conflict and disagreements. So he's East and West. I think he can represent quite well.
Yeah, it's interesting because reports have shown, obviously, weeks ago we learned North Koreans were involved in the conflict, possibly tens of thousands of them. Now a news story came out that says Yemen fighters may have been engaged by Russia in this thing. That sounds like Putin is fairly desperate for new troops. I'm sure Zelensky is equally as desperate.
Yeah, like I said, it's World War One style trench warfare, and but it's trench warfare with precision weapons. So it's not just a matter of ducking from artillery; it's ducking from precision drones that can fly in the door of the bunker with you. It's living hell. Yeah, if they're injecting Houthis, Yemeni Houthis into the fight, I mean, those guys are not used to that kind of intense artillery dueling combat, let alone cold temperatures. Those are not ideal troops for that. And but for our side, great. If they're chewing up Houthis, those are fewer Houthis that are shooting at U.S. Navy ships.
Not to mention, I can't imagine the Russian speaking skills are that sharp. Uh, from these
No,
guys who are desert rats,
again,
basically.
like North Koreans or Yemenis, those guys are sent there as cannon fodder, really. And again, not a great use of human life. Sad. The whole
All right,
thing should
let's
end.
let's exit on this, Eric, because the Trump is basically reshaping the world as we speak. This conflict has been, raging for over 2.5 years. It's one of his big promises is to resolve it quickly. It's got obviously tremendous implications for the broader European region. Um, how does he fix this? How quickly can he resolve this? And what does Zelensky have to give up to do it?
What I understand that Putin has asked for is a 20-year occupation of the areas that they're in now, the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson area. Of course, they're claiming Crimea, but those other areas they want to have a plebiscite, a vote in 10 or 20 years on whether the people want to stay with Russia or whether they want to go back to Ukraine. And I think that's reasonable. They freeze the lines, straighten the lines, clean up all the minefields, and make it almost a north-south Korea ceasefire first, and then eventually some kind of armistice. Putin will not accept Ukraine is part of NATO. Fine, they don't have to be. Ukraine can rebuild its armed forces. They can be unaligned, but NATO friendly. Look, and again, when the Russians have more unfriendly countries on their border than at any time since May of 1941, that causes them significant concern. And with all the talk of, I mean, even Kamala Harris, up until a few weeks before the actual Russian invasion, was talking about Ukraine joining NATO. And imagine if in 1985 the United States was facing the prospect of various states of Mexico joining Warsaw Pact, we wouldn't have accepted that either. So again, I'm not making apologies for all the Russian nonsense. It's really a pity that they invaded. It's very unnecessary carnage, but the unnecessary pushing eastward of all the border lines of Warsaw, of NATO countries, was a red line that was ignored. And again, the Biden administration sent Wendy Sherman, whose previous job before she was working for the State Department was a social worker, to negotiate with the Russians to try to intimidate them, convince them to not invade Ukraine. So it's sad. It's a continuation of very unserious people in the Biden administration that led us down a path to war that hundreds of thousands of people are dead from very unnecessarily.
Yeah, and in their last gasp, the military industrial complex is playing this out for all it's worth. I mean, not only long range missiles, but landmines. Let's just take another minute to talk about those, because it seemed like we pivoted from mines that are designed for tanks and mines that are used for humans. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's another shift that's taken place in just recent weeks from the Biden administration.
Well, sure, because anything that can be located on the battlefield is immediately targeted by multiple precision weapons. And so it's gone from tank and armored warfare with artillery duels to allow a lot of small patrols on bikes or vehicles trying to be fast moving, because anything bigger is so obviously smashed by any kind of precision weapon. So putting out anti-personnel mines makes it impossible for those small units to even patrol safely. So it's really driven towards stasis. There is no great offensive tech that's going to cause a breakthrough, and this war needs to be brought to a close quickly. And thank God Donald Trump will be president in just a few weeks away.
Yeah, look, this is an abject rejection of globalism. The military-industrial complex has been, living fat off of this war for 2.5 years. It's finally coming to a close, but man, this last gasp from this crooked Biden administration with Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, and the like, what a bunch of hoodlums to make these moves in their last weeks in office. Last word to you, Eric.
It's a continuation of unserious people that should not be given those kind of positions of responsibility. And they don't have to live with the consequences of their completely failed policies. And that's disgusting.
Yeah, well, look, there's a lot that's going to take place here in the next several weeks on Off Leash. We're going to keep you posted with Eric's expert insights and information from the field. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Unplugged, by going to unplugged.com/off-leash. It's best for your privacy and digital security in this very wicked, dangerous world we live in. That's it for this segment of Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Until next time.